It's a daily barrier, this one, for particular people often finding themselves in the rural communities across Northern Ireland. Patchy or no broadband at all. You can't check something on Google or book flights if you can't get it, of course. Well, according to a new survey out today, when it comes to broadband speed, what you get is still very much a postcode lottery. Wendy Henderson, who lives just outside the city, has been telling my colleague Linda McCauley from On Your Behalf how much she pays for broadband a month.
I would pay approximately £65 a month for just telephone and just internet.
So how are you getting your broadband through? What's your system at the moment? Is it down the line through the phone?
Well, actually, we have an unusual situation. Instead of fibre, they told us we were getting a separate thing, which was like Fibre Plus, which was a combination, unlimited faster broadband, which was supposed to be a combination of fibre and the cable. And we had to pay more than that for the fibre.
And it's still not good enough.
It's very poor. I mean, it drops all the time. My husband works from home. He's studying right now for a PhD, and he gets online and he could drop a connection at any given time.
That's Wendy there, locally based Wendy Henderson. Well, listening to that, let's chase this one up with Richard Wright, who's an agricultural commentator, Kevin Curran, Professor of Cyber Security at Ulster University. Richard, I would have thought, you think Oxford, the lovely bucolic countryside, but of course, I mean, modern farming requires internet as much as any modern business.
It does, and farming families want to have the same access to it. And I know a lot of people listening to this in urban areas. If you're in the centre of Derry or Strabane listening to this, you'll think, what on earth are they going on about? They're happily going along, they're getting 40 or 50 megabytes. Go out into rural areas, and not that far out of the towns. And some people, yes, they do get a good broadband service, but others are getting, less than 10, maybe 2, maybe less than 2. And they just aren't able to exist in the same society. And it's not just about booking flights. Farmers are being told to do more and more online, to register the birth of calves and things online, to submit their forms online, to do simple things that we all do, like our car tax online. And farmers aren't against technology. They're as much into technology as anybody else, but they can't access the government services online if they don't have the broadband speed to do it. And as you would know, there's nothing more frustrating than being 3/4 of the way through something and then your broadband goes down, or you haven't got the capacity for it. And I think one of the problems is that the speed demand is increasing because farms are getting more broadband demanding in terms of what they need to work. And I think it's just a frustration in the countryside that they end up in the worst of all situations. They get poor broadband through the telephone system, and then they have, in many cases, inadequate 4G coverage where they find they're on 3G or no data coverage on their mobile, and they really feel left out of it. And the one thing you'll hear in farming households all the time is who's watching YouTube, who's downloading stuff. Put it off. I'm trying to fill in forms here and the broadband
Really?
has stopped working. It's a big frustration. I was talking to somebody in Fermanagh last night, is on the border near Rosslea, and he said he really struggles, and there's a constant fight in the house with people using the broadband, and they want to do something, and he said, no, put it off. I have to do these forms online now. And it sounds like taking us back 20 years. As I say, anybody listening to that in Derry will think, well, that just doesn't exist. But it does exist in the countryside. Poor broadband is a fact of life, and it does create a digital divide.
Richard, I thought that the government had tasked, I think it was BT, that they had to roll out better broadband across our communities. But I mean, I suppose this is about pounds, shillings and pence. If you're the only farm in 400 acres, I mean, one connection for one home versus 15 connections in my wee street here in the city.
Yeah, and obviously you haven't got it cabled, so you haven't got the option of having Virgin cabled up the street, as I would where I live in Belfast. You can have all the choices in the world. You can have BT, Sky, Virgin. You can have anything. As you say, in a farming situation, you don't have that option. And in fairness to BT, they have improved it. They've improved a lot of the exchange and the hub structure. But the problem is, as you say, it's an isolated farm, and there's a copper wire ultimately goes into the farm, and that copper wire can be fairly long and subject to being affected by the weather. And there's a limit to what you can do to speed up broadband unless you can get cabinets and get fibre in the individual houses. It's just a function of the distance that you are from the cabinet.
Kevin, let me bring you in at that stage. I mean, I think about 6 months ago you brought up this issue that you can get boosters and you can improve, if you add stuff onto your internet. But I'm sure most farmers know that anyway, don't they?
To do, yeah, but that is the boosters are to do with the 3G and the 4G signal mobile broadband, and that never really is adequate in a lot of rural areas. So the problem is double-fold, and of course, the whole problem with broadband in rural areas is called the last mile connectivity, really, and it's economics as well. That when if you got people within a 2 mile square radius and you got 400 households, and you've only got 2 or 3 households in the same square mile radius in a rural area, the broadband providers, really, the internet service providers, are not going to roll out all the way along, and put it along the road. Now, there are a few things which are improving. Now they actually are stringing the fibre optic cable itself along the telephone wires. They're doing that down south in a way, and they're starting to do that in the UK. So that in some ways is an improvement. That saves a lot of money, but it really always comes down to economics, really. That and just like you're saying, that there is an onus on a lot of these providers to when they win the contracts, especially with the mobile rollout, with the 5G licenses and the 4G, that they had to provide coverage to a percentage of the UK population. But of course, a lot of these people who won the contracts are dragging their heels. So again, the government are looking, and they had been for some time, at putting in a kind of a social tariff. Again, people may not know this, but that existed for years with telephone lines in rural communities. That in other words, that the cost of a telephone line, if you were 5 miles out in the middle of a mountain, that the government would have to provide that, but you still only pay the same rate as someone living in the city, and that's being subsidised again. So they're trying to look at a universal service that would be funded by all the providers of telecommunication services, so that people in rural areas would not have to pay double or 3 times the price of someone in the city again.
And Richard,
that's one solution.
There is a better broadband scheme. It's a subsidy that you can get if you can't get affordable broadband with a speed of at least 2 megabits, MB anyway, per second. So, I mean, I'm sure farmers know about that as well, do they?
They do, and I think a lot of farmers have taken that up, but it is the issue, and it is the sort of last mile into the house thing. But I think one of the problems is that the things that we all do online, that we expect to do online, and which farming families, particularly the children in farming families, expect to be able to do online because their urban counterparts do it. All those things are becoming more and more demanding. So you can do the simplest thing that you want to do, of maybe applying for your car tax with 2 megabytes. But 2 megabytes isn't going to be any use to you whatsoever if you want to download something off YouTube, or you want to download something off the BBC iPlayer. So everything we do with broadband is more demanding of more speed and more capacity. And the problem, and a big frustration for farmers, and like I know it, I'm on BT Internet. My daughter lives in rural Fermanagh. She's on BT Internet as well. She pays exactly the same as me. In Belfast, I have 70 megabytes. In Fermanagh, she has about 12, but the costs are the same as I pay in Belfast. And that is a frustration for people in rural areas.
Okay.
Yes, they accept they have the advantages of living in rural areas, and it's nice to live in a rural area, but they don't want to be separated from being able to do the things that the rest of people do. But yes, there's a big problem. The perfection comes with technological limitations, but people do, yes, there is a better broadband, but 2 megabytes isn't going to do any use whatsoever. It's better than nothing, but it's not going to let you live in the real world.
There you go. Well, as it happens, Jane Davidson, who's with us this week on our placement, you live at the foot of Slemish, lovely Slemish, Jane, in County Antrim.
In County Antrim, yes.
And you're on this scheme, your family.
Yes, well, I recently moved 3 miles down the road, big shift, but my house, my home, my family farm, broadband was pretty useless. If you had more than one phone going, that was it, that was the end of it. So if someone was messaging on Facebook or WhatsApp, that was about the height.
You're joking. That scenario Richard's just been talking about. Get off YouTube!
Yeah, that was exactly
I'm trying to do my subsidies.
Dad was never a huge fan of doing anything online anyway, but he recently discovered YouTube and the fact that you could watch other people farm anywhere in the world. And so the argument then got a bit rowdier. But yeah, I moved then, and married a farmer, moved down the road, and now trying to do paperwork or banking or even, uni assignments, brothers and sisters all trying to argue to get the internet is a disaster. But I then got involved with the Better Broadband scheme, which was great. Found out about it through local neighbours and half of our community now, I'd say, is signed up on it, and it's fab.
So what do they do? Do they bring additional technology to your area, or boosters, or what?
Yeah, so the one we're working with is actually Husky Networks, and the way it works, it bounces from windmills. There's quite a few windmills have been put up around our area. Yeah, so they bounce the network across from windmills, and if you can see it, then you can get the internet. So it's great. It's we were on between 0.5 and 1.5 megabytes with BT, and it was absolutely unusable. You couldn't use it. And any time I tried to work from home, you might as well have called it a day off because you couldn't do anything. But now it's 30 up and 5 down, so we're watching Netflix, and
that's amazing.
Yeah, I don't know, we're living.
Right, but there you are. Richard, we need to get farming people maybe listening to this, or people out in the country, onto that scheme. Kevin, just a final word, if you would. Down the line, I mean, is technology going to deal with this? I mean, surely there'll come a time when internet will be just like the air we breathe in terms of its availability.
Of course, yeah. But again, just to let people know, for iPlayer, you need 2 megabits per second, really, and Netflix 1.5, and high definition iPlayer you need 3 megabits. And of course, the problem we wouldn't have a problem now because broadband speeds and mobile have obviously steadily improved over time, but also web pages have got larger with more objects, and we've got larger, so therefore
hungrier.
Yes, exactly. And then of course Netflix didn't exist a number of years ago, and it swallows up about 80% of broadband downloads. But 5G in some ways will be a solution, but of course, again, 5G will have smaller cells. It only broadcasts into a smaller region, but it only works in urban areas. So again, even when our speeds for their mobiles, what we're doing will really dramatically improve within the next 2 years. Again, rural areas will actually see a bigger gap in the speeds that they get out there. So that doesn't solve the problem for them.
Okay.
The one thing you do have in rural areas, which does solve it to some degree, is the wireless broadband. Now, it's not as good as when you have fiber coming into your premises, but wireless broadband, if you can get it, is a kind of stopgap solution. It does give you good speeds, but unfortunately, there will be a greater gap in the near future when it actually comes to rural mobile broadband speeds.
They are a backstop, if you like. Jane, would you swap the country for fast broadband in the town?
No, to be honest, it's kind of handy when you can go home and have no signal and just ignore the rest of the world. Yeah.
Thank you all. Richard, thanks for that. Richard Wright, agricultural commentator, Professor Kevin Curran, and our own Jane Davidson there, who lives at the foot of Slemish, lovely Slemish in County Antrim.